He suggested that we are cutting down all of our forests. I don't know where he is getting this information, but there is Joe Biden talking about environmentalism or something.
For the rest of the world, one of the goals I have at one point to do now is to build back a better world. So all those countries in Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East who don't have the capacity to make it better for themselves. We cut down all our forests, we're doing fine. Guess what? We're part of the reason for the global warming.
We did. We cut down all of our forests because we didn't. I'm just going to point that out. We did not cut down all of our forests. We have a lot of trees here in the United States. But that was just the beginning.
Yeah.
Joe Biden also gave us a George Bush please clap moment. He explained that you can cheer for him. Well, the problem is no one wants to, Joe. No one. Here we go.
Thanks for making a difference for the families here in North Carolina, Governor. You're setting an example across the country. Thank you. And look, you can cheer. It's all right.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, but that wasn't the worst. Because the worst is he finishes this speech, and Joe Biden literally starts shaking hands with nobody. Like, people who aren't there. He's shaking hands with ghosts. It's as though Patrick Swayze is just standing on the other hand here, like from Ghost. Just speaking to him. It's Corn Pop. It's the ghost of Corn Pop. I will describe this to you if you're just listening and you can't watch it, but you really should watch the clip. It's amazing. He finishes his speech. He literally puts out his hands to shake hands with a person who is not there. Our president is seeing things. Here we go.
God bless you.
He finishes. He turns to his right, and he proceeds to put out his hand as though he's going to shake hands with somebody. And then he turns to the back as though he's going to shake hands with somebody. Corn Pop is in neither place. And then he just wanders around the stage aimlessly until somebody directs him on stage. He's definitely with it. So, this Biden administration, which is in serious trouble, they've come up with their new plan. Wait, guess what it is? Yes, they're doubling down on Biden's garbage. That's what the plan is. The plan is, we're losing everybody, double down on what pleases college-educated, white liberal women who want Sarai Rao over to dinner to explain to them their racial flaws, and also black Americans. This is his plan. And by the way, black Americans are not buying this increasingly. He's down with everybody except for college-educated white women. So now, the Biden administration, this is their new plan to win people back. They trotted out domestic policy advisor Susan Rice, who's a garbage heap while she was serving in the Obama administration as national security advisor. Now she's back as domestic policy advisor. And apparently, he is going to advance racial equity. And some of the steps they are pushing are promoting fair housing policy, which presumably means spending more government money on affordable housing, which of course ends generally with rent control or crappy affordable housing. That's what the government does. Strengthen the nation-to-nation relationship with Native American tribes and Alaska Natives. We're going to have to explain how that works. End private prisons, which presumably means the closing and shuttering of prisons, which will exacerbate the crime rates. And combat xenophobia against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, without mentioning who exactly is committing the vast bulk of hate crime against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And the answer is not white people. So that's going to be kind of awkward for the Biden administration. More than 90 federal agencies released their action equity plans on Thursday. They were ordered by President Biden during his first days in office. All cabinet-level agencies unveiled senior Biden officials called an ambitious equity and racial justice agenda around labor, housing, the environment, healthcare, broadband, and law enforcement. The police reform and voting rights legislation stalled in Congress, according to Axios. The Biden administration's executive actions are aimed at doing what it can to fulfill a promise to address systemic racism. Details released by the White House also include plans to make national parks more accessible to people with disabilities and reduce discrimination against LGBTQIA2+, equal sign, caret sign, command sign, hashtag children, people. Senior Biden officials said agencies would simplify grant programs and government documents to make services easier to access for people of color and tribal communities. So, every single department of the government is now going to be oriented towards enabling Americans to only reverse discrimination is capable of rectifying that discrimination. The Department of Housing and Urban Development had to examine how to reduce bias in home appraisal. The Department of Commerce promised to spend $50 billion on broadband infrastructure in rural and tribal communities. By the way, broadband infrastructure is definitely going to solve the problems in rural and tribal communities. Unfortunately, an extensive rate of crime and alcoholism and abuse, probably more internet is going to fix that. That's where we need to put our focus. The Department of Veterans Affairs said it will work to improve the social and economic determinants for the health of LGBTQIA plus minus divided by sign veterans. Because that's, with our military shrinking, we need the Department of Veterans Affairs to really focus in our soldiers who are, in fact, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, etc. NASA said it would release Earth science data in more accessible formats to show environmental challenges in underserved communities. Because that's what NASA does. They don't explore space anymore. Instead, they release reports on how racist the environment is. Here, for example, is NASA explaining its new magical equity plan. We are no longer going to worry about, getting to Mars. We're going to worry about whether there are enough black astronauts or something.
At NASA, all of our missions, whether it's in space or here on Earth, they're going to require equal opportunity. So today we're releasing NASA's 2022 Equity Action Plan. It outlines this agency's strategy to improve fairness and to try to give more opportunities for Americans across the country.
Diversity in space! Yeah, well, I'm sure we're freaking out the Chinese with this stuff. I mean, if we don't have a lesbian little person in space by the year 2025, I think America has failed. I mean, honestly, we've had first black woman vice president, first black female Supreme Court justice, although we don't know what a woman is. But until we have a lesbian transgender woman who's a little person,
I don't know why he's
who's
up
black,
so early for her.
who has 1 foot in space, so that we have equal opportunity, I think NASA has failed. That's really where things are at. So,
Well, if you put him to bed early, he's going to wake up
the
early.
media and the Biden administration, they're very focused on equity. Here's the thing. All of that is a lie. What they're actually focused on is just lying to you. We're not going to do that here at Daily Wire. Daily Wire is intent on changing the culture, which is why we are actively changing it in literally all the ways we possibly find. Now we've started our own publishing wing called DW Books. We are proud to publish books that actively fight the left's monopoly on storytelling, like Fire Ring, but mostly peaceful, the 2020 riots and gaslighting of America by Julio Rosas, who pulls back the curtain on the Black Lives Matter riots that broke out across the country in the aftermath of George Floyd's death. Rosas was reporting from the ground firsthand, and he gets his experiences and exposes the media's attempts to convince Americans fatal and destructive riots were actually mostly peaceful. Check out the trailer.
The media gaslit the American
Eventually.
all of 2020 as the rise of COVID. They did not give you the story. I was there. I just ran out here in Seattle. I saw all the riots with my own eyes. Big giant riots. Businesses starting to be looted. All the cops were trapped and surrounded. Police were being ordered to retreat. I experienced the tear gas. I experienced the smoke. This was very real to me. The mainstream media, they were trying to call them protests. CNN with that Chiron saying fire even is peaceful. They're trying to push a narrative. Don't believe the lockdowns because they were trying to appease that very dedicated Antifa movement that's there. If you read my book, Fire is Mostly Peaceful, you will get the full story. You will learn what actually happened during the riots of 2020 and what the media is now. Buy my book, Firing is Mostly Peaceful, everywhere books are sold.
I mean, the media lied so unbelievably much in 2020, and Julio really does pull back the curtain because he was there. The book is available for pre-order on Amazon or anywhere you buy books online. Go pre-order your copy today. You're listening to the largest, fastest growing conservative podcast and radio show in the nation. Here's the thing. All of this equity stuff, it's not going to work. The Democrats know it's not going to work, which is why they're running headlong away from this sort of stuff. So, for example, yesterday, Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, actually called out Black Lives Matter, saying, I noticed that you guys don't have anything to say when black civilians are being killed by other black civilians. And if you actually cared about black lives, you might comment on that. That used to be a quote-unquote right-wing talking point. The reason Eric Adams is saying it is because it turns out the equity agenda of Joe Biden and company is garbage and they don't like it.
I thought Black Lives Matter. Where are all those who stated Black Lives Matter? Then go do an analysis of who was killed or shot last night. I was up all night speaking to my commanders in the Bronx, in Brooklyn. The victims were black. Many of the shooters were black.
Okay, so when you have people like Eric Adams who are now mirroring talking points that were used by Republicans in 2020, you know the Democrats have gone down the wrong path there. The polls, by the way, show the Democrats have gone down the wrong path. They keep saying equity, 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 and we need to mainline this garbage into teaching kids. We need to teach your kids that America is a systemically racist country. We need to teach your kids about gender, identity, and sexual orientation in kindergarten. And turns out Americans generally don't like this sort of stuff. There's a new poll out from the Associated Press. And what it found is that Americans are, quote-unquote, very split about how much children in K-12 schools should be taught about racism and sexuality. About 4 in 10 Republicans say teachers in local public schools discuss issues related to sexuality too much. Only about 1 in 10 say too little. Among Democrats, those numbers are reversed, meaning that they think that teachers should talk about sexuality more. I'm looking at the stats right now. And here is what it says. Partisan split over parent and teacher influence on school curriculum. But it finds that all adults, 50%, say that parents have too little influence on what is said in class. 38% of Democrats and 65% of Republicans. How about teachers? 51% of all adults say teachers have too little input on what goes on in the classroom. So I think people just don't understand this question. 62% of Democrats, however, say that teachers have too little input. So they say Democrats are fairly consistent here. What they say is 38% of Democrats think parents have not enough impact. 62% of Democrats think that that teachers have too little impact. So they want teachers, not parents, Democrats do. For Republicans, those numbers are reversed. 65% of Republicans say parents should have more power. 40% of Republicans say teachers should have more power. But here's the thing about this poll. When you look at the downline numbers, this is not a poll of parents. This is a poll of all Americans. And it wildly understands parents. And for people for whom this is the top priority, what gets taught in schools, I guarantee you, people who have kids that are not siding with Democrats on these issues. So you have a bunch of single ladies up in San Francisco who are saying, yes, teachers definitely should be teaching what they want to say, not what parents want. And then you have parents who actually make this their number one issue, saying the opposite. Democrats are fools to embrace this issue. And yet they do embrace this issue. And honestly, there's so much of Democrats embracing these issues that's about their mirroring of what the media is saying. And you have practical examples of this. You remember last year that the Department of Homeland Security launched an investigation into the Del Rio sector border patrol on the border because the media pretended that members of the Border Patrol were whipping migrants. They were not whipping migrants, they were actually using the reins to control their horses. And you remember that Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, promised a speedy investigation into the so-called whipping during Breitbart. He said it would be completed in days, if not weeks. Well, that happened months ago. That was in September of 2021. Now they've completed the investigation, and they've quietly leaked the fact that none of it was true. There was no whipping. Okay, but this just demonstrates how this administration runs. It just mirrors whatever they think the media want from them. And this is true on matters of equity as well. The media actively downplays the real problems of real Americans in favor of racial wokeness. There's a study from the Washington Free Beacon came out yesterday, which confirms what everybody knows, which is that the media dramatically undercover the race of suspects if the suspects happen to be black. The Washington Free Beacon points out the man arrested for Tuesday's New York City subway shooting is a black nationalist and outspoken racist who railed against whites, Jews, and Hispanics. A careful reader of the New York Times could be forgiven for overlooking that. In a nearly 2,000-word article on the attack, this suspect's race was not mentioned. The same was true for coverage offered by Reuters. The Washington Post only mentioned the race of the suspect in relation to his condemnation of training programs for low-income black youths. Media critics on the right say the conspicuous omission of race from these news reports illustrates a trend among prestige papers, which de-emphasize or omit the race of non-white criminals while playing up the race of white offenders. But is it a real pattern? Yes. The Washington Free Beacon review of hundreds of articles published by major papers over a span of 2 years finds the papers downplay the race of non-white offenders, mentioning the race much later in articles than they do for white offenders. These papers are also 3 to 4 times more likely to mention an offender's race at all if he is white, a disparity that grew in the wake of George Floyd's death in 2020 and the protests that followed. The Free Beacon collected data on nearly 1,100 articles about homicides from 6 major newspapers, all written between 2019 and 2021. Those papers included the Chicago Tribune, LA Times, New York Times, Philadelphia Inquirer, San Francisco Chronicle, and Minneapolis Star-Tribune. For each article, we collected the offender's and victim's name and race and noted where in the article the offender's race was mentioned, if at all. The data suggests an alarming editorial trend, in which major papers routinely omit information from news reports, presenting readers with a skewed picture of who does and doesn't commit crime. These editorial choices are part and parcel of racial reckoning that swept newsrooms in the wake of Floyd's murder, which saw journalists dramatically overhauling crime coverage to emphasize the view that the criminal justice system is racist at the root, perhaps at the expense of honesty about the individual offender's crimes. So they looked at which paragraph the offender's race was mentioned in. For white offenders, for white offenders, the race of the suspect was mentioned between 30 and 40% of the time in the first 10% of the article, and another 30 to 40% of the time in the second 10% of the article. So, in other words, in the first couple paragraphs of the article, if it's a white offender, it was going to get mentioned like 70% of the time. Black offender, 70% of the way down in the article is where the plurality of racial mentions happen. All racial mentions were backlogged in these articles. That is not a shock, because of course the media have an agenda. And then the Democratic Party mirrors that agenda. And you can see it in individual cases. The media will go out of their way to cover certain crime stories as national crime stories, and they will go out of their way to downplay certain crime stories as national crime stories. So as I mentioned yesterday, there was a black man who went around attempting to ram Orthodox Jews with his car in Lakewood, New Jersey. It is not a national news story. You don't know the name of the man unless you listen to the show. You don't even know about the story unless you listen to the show. However, there's a full-scale, long piece in the Washington Post today about a man who was shot by the cops. It was Patrick Loyola. He was killed by a police officer in the western Michigan city of Grand Rapids. Here's the way the Washington Post describes it. Quote, what began as a traffic stop ended with Loyola shot in the head. The latest police shooting of an unarmed black man to shake the nation. He was 26 years old, a father of two. The headline from the Washington Post is, family of man shot by Michigan police say son was, quote, killed like an animal. Sounds like rather inflammatory coverage, does it not? I mean, it sounds as though this person was just killed for no reason at all. Well, fortunately, there is tape of the incident. And what the tape of the incident actually shows is that this particular suspect not only resisted arrest, but grabbed the officer's taser and then proceeded to wrestle with the officer on the ground continuously for minutes at a time. In fact, we have some of the tape. If you're seriously disturbed by this sort of thing, don't watch it. And you can see the suspect repeatedly put his hand on the officer's taser. Rule of thumb. If you grab an officer's taser, that is the rule of thumb. If you're no longer an officer, grab an officer's taser, and attempt to take the taser away from an officer, you are attempting to become armed. That is the goal of grabbing the taser in the first place. No officer of the law anywhere in the United States will allow you to take a weapon off someone else. Simple fact. And yet the Washington Post covers this as though this person, read the first paragraph, and what you get is that this guy was shot for no reason whatsoever. His mother, Dorcas Loyola, said through tears, quote, I'm surprised and astonished to see that it's here that my son has been killed with a bullet. That was my beloved son. I'm sure that's true. But that does not change the underlying fact, which is if you resist arrest from a cop by trying to grab his weapon, you're going to get shot. The department released 4 videos on Wednesday that showed the incident from various vantage points, including from the passenger riding with Loyola and the officer's body camera, which turned off as the men struggled and didn't capture the shooting because of the pressure on the camera, presumably. And then, of course, you get the obligatory paragraphs about the local authorities who are troubled by the footage and how the video is painful to watch. Yes, it turns out that virtually all police footage is very difficult to watch, particularly when someone dies on camera. The tape shows Loyola grabbing repeatedly for the weapon. Here's some of the tape. You can see. Look, he takes his hand, he has it, he's grabbing the officer's taser right now. He's not letting go of the officer's taser. Right?
Let go of the taser!
Okay, you can see. He's going to yell, let go of the taser. Okay, and then he shoots the suspect. And the reason he shoots the suspect, it's horrible to watch. It always is horrible to watch somebody die on camera. Terrible, terrible stuff. That's the difficulty of being a police officer when someone is trying to take a taser off of you. Family said the video showed he was not posing a threat when he was killed. They described it as difficult to watch, with Leota's brother Thomas calling it the, quote, most horrifying thing I've ever seen in my life. Well, I'm sure it is a horrifying thing to watch, but the notion that he was not posing a threat, he's repeatedly grabbing the taser. Now, the reason that I point this out is because every single case like this is covered by the media as though it is just purely a case of an innocent person being shot by the cops for no reason at all without resisting arrest. And then it is treated as an aspect of criminal justice racism. That is not criminal justice racism. There's no evidence of racism in the state. There's not even evidence that the cop was violating the law in the state. But this is a national news story. And I guarantee you the Biden administration will speak about it. They'll have the President of the United States make comments about it. And they will just continue to mirror bad priorities, largely because of the media coverage. And this is the thing, overall. The left has now created an echo chamber of its own making. It's actually very damaging to the left because they're out of touch with the rest of Americans. And if anyone, from Elon Musk, Daily Wire, if anybody threatens that monopoly on informational dissemination, they get very, very, very angry. I'm perfectly happy to read you articles from the Washington Post, New York Times, The LA Times. I do it pretty much every day on the show. However, the left wishes for you only to hear those points of view. And because they've created this monopoly on information, I think they don't even understand the damage they are doing to themselves. They've now walled themselves off from the rest of the American public. And they're going to pay the price electorally in 2022 in really, really heavy ways and beyond. Alrighty, we have another hour of the show later today. But first, don't forget to end your week by tuning into the Andrew Klavan Show every Friday. He's got exciting evening for you as always. Head on over to dailywire.com, 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, and tune in. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is the Ben Shapiro Show.
Did he just ping his own phone?
The Ben Shapiro Show is produced by Elliot Feld. Executive producer Jeremy Boren. Our supervising producer is Mathis Glover. And our production manager is Pavel Wydowski. Associate producer Bradford Carrington. Editing is by Adam Sayevitz. Audio is mixed by Mike Coromino. Hair and makeup is by Fabiola Cristina. Production assistant Jessica Curry.
That'd be funny.
The Ben Shapiro Show is a Daily Wire production. Copyright Daily Wire 2022.
Hey everybody, this is Andrew Klavan, host of the Andrew Klavan Show. You know, some people are depressed because the Republic is collapsing, the end of days is approaching, and the moon's turned to blood. But on the Andrew Klavan Show, that's where the fun just gets started. So come on over to the Andrew Klavan Show and laugh your way through the fall of the Republic with me, Andrew Klavan.
We have right now is the best one that we have. But we're all going to play this game. If someone decides to be the Michael Jordan of capitalism, you can't stop them. You can't say, no, you're playing this game too well. You're playing this game too hard. You're too obsessed with this game. You're going to have that.
Yeah, you can stop them. You can try to stop people from winning crookedly, which is what you should do. And, you know, there's a couple of things that are really worth delving into with regards to that, too, because there's this sort of Marxist notion that all this inequality is generated as a consequence of capitalism. And that's actually technically false. Because if you look at, there seems to be something like a law of nature that's described by this statistical model called the Pareto distribution. And it basically suggests that in any creative domain, there's going to be a small number of people who will do almost all of the output. But it doesn't just apply to human beings. It applies to the heights of trees in it applies to the size of cities, and it applies to the mass of stars, which is something like the more you have, the more you get. It's something, you can imagine how that would work with a star. As it gets bigger and bigger and its gravitational mass increases, it's going to attract more and more matter. And then as a city grows, well, more and more people are excited to move there because of all the opportunities, and so some cities start to grow tremendously and others don't. But this phenomena where a small number of people end up controlling a tremendous proportion of the resource is not only limited to money, and it doesn't only occur in capitalist societies. It occurs everywhere. It's like a natural law. So you see the same thing with number of points scored by a